started. Make sure recording's going. Okay, we are live, and I will share my screen of my slides. And Rebecca, I'll have you make sure that you can see it.
Sure.
Okay. Does that look good?
Yep, looks good.
All right. So again, I know if we had, I think one or two people jumped in on right before I gave the brief overview of what we're going to go over today, but I'm going to start. My name is Brett Melton. I am the livestock agent for the River Valley District. Rebecca, if you want to quickly, well, I'll let her introduce herself before she goes, and Trenton do the same thing. But we got Rebecca Zach, crops agent for the River Valley District, and Trenton Hargrave, who is the economist for Kansas Farm Management Association. I'll let those two introduce themselves right before their presentation. I will be taking some questions after mine, and Rebecca after hers, and then Trenton after his. And if there's any burning questions at the end, we'll certainly take all those as well. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with our pasture lease survey summary. We sent that out like we usually do with all our other surveys at the end of November. We give operators and landowners 4 weeks to fill it out and send back, and we send out our reminders, and we compile that over the month of December, and we do our presentation like about this time every year. I know I see some familiar faces on here that have been to others in the past. And then also we do our summary paper, which we will email to each of you tomorrow after the presentation today, and you will have a copy of our survey summary. If you would like, we'll email you the PDF. If you would like a hard copy to mail to you, for us to mail to you, you can just respond to the email and with your address, and we will mail you a hard copy of that as well. So now on to the pasture section. These are just a quick summary of the survey questions that we ask, county, age, and just some general things about the producer and the landowner, kind of how they're related. We'll get into all these later. Just a couple things, 2 new things that we added this year. On the pasture, we asked when payment was due. I know we've had a few questions on that over the last couple of years. And then also, I was just kind of, maybe more for me, was the type of fence that people use. And if there are anything that we didn't cover, please let us know. Just throw something in the chat or just shout it out. If there's something that you think we maybe missed, just let us know, and we can add it to next year's presentation or next year's survey. Just kind of a quick overview of the Kansas Ag Census data. I know you guys probably are pretty familiar with this, but just to see how many number of cattle we have in our district. Clay and Cloud have a little bit fewer than Republic and Washington. I think that's mainly due to the amount of pasture ground or farmable ground, and also Washington and Republic County, I think, are the larger of the two in area. But we have about just shy of 200,000 head of cattle in our district. And then on the return, so just to look at how many surveys were returned, I kind of show this as a little preview. You know, you see Washington Republic pretty much gave us the bulk of our responses, just over half of them anyway. But also we send them based on townships. So we also send more out to Washington and Republic. So kind of got to watch your numbers and realize where they're coming from and why certain percentages are larger than others anyway. And we had, I think, one survey that didn't indicate which county they were in. So we just lumped them in with the average of the district, but we weren't able to average them into each county. And we had 52 responses for our pasture survey this year. Age of operator, I like to show this mainly because I think everyone knows the age of our farmers are getting older. We're not getting an influx of those younger generations for whatever reason. 68% of our producers are over the age of 51. So, what's going to happen in 10 and 20 years? Are we going to be able to fill in those spots? Just something we need to be thinking about. And we've been hit on, me and Rebecca and I, from our PDC about succession planning. So that's something everyone needs to have in mind for the years coming up. Rental rates. So I'll jump right into the dollars here. Clay County had the fewest, 24, just under 25. Cloud was at 26.5. Republic was 28, and Washington was just over $30 an acre. But the district average was $28.18 on a per acre basis. And again, if I go through these fast, it'll be in the paper. I'll email that out to you, and you can dig into those more later. And then on a dollars per pair basis, obviously not as many people are doing that. It just seems to be less common. See those numbers there, anywhere from $1.18 on the average for clay to $2.25, which we only had one response in Cloud, but it was $225 per pair. So, a little bit more variable there. I'm not sure why that is. The low on a dollar per pair was $85, so very low, up to $225 per pair. So I don't know why there's so much variations when we switch to $1 per pair, but there just has been. I did a weighted average of the last 4 years, and this is in the paper as well, and it's about $169.08. So that's over the last 4 years, the average of all the producers that's indicated that they did a rental agreement on a dollars per pair basis. And then even less common is the dollars per head per day. We had 3 responses total in the district, $1.68 per head per day. And that's been pretty consistent over the last 4 or 5 years that I've been a part of this. Just not many people do it, but it's always right around $1.50 to $2. Looking further into the dollars per acre basis, again, I'm looking into that further because it's the most common. So again, we have the averages for the counties and for the district as a whole. And then I threw in the minimums and the maximum from each of those. So our minimum was $18.75 per acre in Washington County, and we get up all the way to $40 per acre. So again, seems like a pretty wide range. Different factors play into that, and we'll get into those a little bit later. Just for note, the median, so of all the responses that we have, the median was right in the middle, $26.50. The most common response out of all those, of all the people that responded, was $25 per acre. So again, we've been pretty consistent in our district between the $25 and $30 per acre on pasture rent. So this one's new for the 2020 lease survey. We asked them when were payments made or when were they due. Most people did it annually, but there was several that did it biannually. They were all collected at the beginning and end of the grazing season. So again, sometime in April before they turned cattle out, and then the final payment was made at the end of the grazing season once they pulled their cattle off pasture. So most of the annual payments were made at the beginning of the season. Only 2 indicated that, only 2 indicated they were made at the beginning of the season. The rest of the annual one-time payments were made after they pulled cattle off and at the end of the grazing season. So going into the grazing season, it is pretty typical. 39 out of the 46 that responded, so 85% of respondents started grazing in early May or late April. And I put early May or late April. That was within 2 weeks of May 1st on either side of that. And then other than the 85%, we had 2 people indicate that they started before that. So not many people start before late April. And then 5 indicated that they waited until June and July to begin their grazing. And then towards the end of the season, I don't know if there's a I don't know, two different schools of thought, but it seems like there's always people that pull in late October, early November, pretty standard. That was only 57%, 26 out of the 46. And then there's a few more that pull in early October and late September, so 32% of respondents. I'm wondering if that's not has a little bit to do with people that maybe are planning on burning in the spring and want a little bit of fuel left over to complete that burn. That's maybe one reason why there's a few people that pull a little earlier. And then there was also 5 that pulled early September, and then there was 1 in December. And we look at the number of producers that are actually grazing these different acres per pair. So in the middle, I have 5 to 7 acres per pair, 5 to 7 acres per pair, which is what I would consider to be average. 30 of the 46 selected, or 49 rather, selected that, or actually no, that was 46, 45. So there was a few that grazed a little heavier than that. 6 out of all those, 4 of those indicated they had a shorter grazing season. So yes, we did have some people that, grazed what we would consider a higher amount than they should be, but they also grazed shorter days. And I think those were around 100 days, whereas a normal grazing season is 150 or so. And then there's a few that grazed probably a little lighter than what I would consider to be average at over 7 acres per pair. District average was right at $6, 6 acres per pair. Target calving month. This one really isn't really relevant, I don't think, to the amount you're going to pay. But it just shows you kind of most of our herds are spring calving herds. Some people don't consider January to be spring or February to be spring, but they are marketing for that fall market for those calves. So that's why we call them spring calving herds. And then just a few in August and a few in September. March is obviously when most of our calves are hitting the ground in our state and in our area. Stalker information, not a lot. We don't get a lot of stalker cattle in our district, or at least we don't get a lot of responses. We only had 5 in the district this year. The average stalking rate was 3 acres per head. That was out of the 5 responses. So, fairly certain on that. More responses than we've gotten in the past. Average daily gain, I got 1.49. We asked them how long they grazed and how many their beginning and end weight. So I was able to calculate their average daily gain in the district. So 1.5 pounds is pretty typical for an average daily gain. And then the 4 responses averaged $27 per acre. And then one of those 5 responses indicated they grazed $2 per head per day. Okay. Renegotiation of leases. I always encourage people to renegotiate at least, maybe if not every year, every other year. Things change, and I think you should be considering all your options, cattle markets, and just something that should be done frequently. However, we did have a few people that wait every about 10 or 15% wait 3 to 5 years. And then one response said they had never renegotiated their leases. And I was like, well, maybe that's a young farmer that's just starting out. Well, it was not the case. They had been leasing for 12 years, and I looked at their rate, and they were low. So I guess I understand why they wouldn't want to renegotiate if they were the renter, but they were well below the average. And then other terms. So when I say other terms, maybe who's taking care of what, who's watering the cattle, who's managing the fence. So those are kind of the other terms that we think about. Most people do that every year. We didn't get only 11 responses on that. So I assume the people that didn't answer that don't renegotiate any other terms. They're just worried about their leasing rate. The length of the lease. So if we look at the bottom here, we had a few people that were new in their lease, quite a few that were 2 to 5 years. So I would still consider relatively new leases. And then it's just kind of, I don't know, somewhat scattered, 6 to 10 years, 11 to 20 years or the same. 20 to 30 years, we had 10, and then 30 plus years, we had 5. Average lease length was 15 years. I just thought this was interesting. Last year, we had one lease that they had indicated they had leased it for 40 years, and their dad had leased it 40 years before that. So that's a long lease, and I think you have to have some good communication to have a lease that lasts that long. Oral, we asked whether the lease was written or if it was oral. Majority, 2/3 of them are just oral leases. I would recommend people kind of having a written lease, honestly. You assume your neighbor you're renting from or whoever is doing what they should do. But sometimes we hear stories, nightmares of people, well, I didn't have a written lease, and me and Rebecca just got a call today on that. It was a cropland. The landlord, the renter, was not happy with one of the losing their land and that they were renting. Bottom line is it was an oral lease and he didn't have a leg to stand on. So we always recommend getting those in writing. Relationship to a landowner. Most of our leases are unrelated to their leaser. A few are distant family, so about 25% are actually related. So not many. And then where the landowner actually lives relative to that piece of land. Again, just under 3/4 of them live in the same county. A few live out of county, and then there's a few that live out of state. So again, as we think, as if we have a landowner that lives out of state, they're probably not really attached to it. So we might see some lower quality of land. The leaser maybe not care as much, not necessarily, but it can be affect their leasing rate as well. So just some things, other things to consider. Water supply, when we're looking at pastures, I think majority of people think of ponds as their water supply for cattle, which obviously is the case, 83% of them. 35% have a stream, 25% have a well, only 10% are on rural water. And then we had a few people transporting water, and then a few that were on spring tanks. So it kind of tapers off. But again, ponds are predominantly used. And then also we had one indicate that the pond was the source of water. However, it was fenced off and they had pumped it to a tank. So again, water quality issues. There's some cost share opportunities through the cause and wraps, a few water wetlands and streams conservation organizations that will do some cost share with you if you want to get your cattle out of the pond and drinking out of a tank. Just something to consider going forward. Fencing. So these two are kind of inverse of each other. Who's providing the labor for the fence and who's providing the material for the fence. Labor is generally provided by the tenant, and the material is generally provided by the landowner. So like I said, they're pretty much inverse. I think a few of them responded that the materials are taken care of by the tenant, the small things, like baling wire or whatever to fix it. But if there's any major repairs, the landlord takes care of those. So another new question we had this year was whether we use barbed wire or electric or a combination of the two. Again, I assumed this. Most people use barbed wire, 3/4, and then there's also about 25% of them that use a combination of barbed wire and electric fencing. So they do some cross fencing, was what I presume, with that electric fence, so they can control their grazing and have them graze one area and do some rotational grazing that way. So again, pretty obvious. I think majority of people have barbed wire fencing. Nobody has electric only. Weeds, trees, and brush. I think these two pictures are the epitome of weeds and trees in our district, the musk thistle and the cedar trees, eastern red cedars. We also have locust trees and hedge trees. These are the four biggest problems we have in our district. They've been the biggest four problems for, forever. We do have some new ones, but before we get to those, the cedar trees, 87% of people indicated they had to fight with cedar trees, 70% with musk thistles. Same amount, 66% have to deal with locusts and hedge trees. Then we get farther down the list, brush. We asked them what kind of brush. There's different kinds, buckbrush, dogwood, and blackberry, most common. And then also we have Sericea lethbridisa is creeping up this way. That's what you see in the top right corner. It's hard to see in that picture. Once you see it once, you'll know what it is. I'm guessing there's a lot of people that don't know what that is. And also right below that is the old world blue stem. I think those are two emerging problems that we're going to have. And I think some of them already are problems. I just don't think all the landowners and producers realize that what they have in their pastures. Control methods and responsibility of those weeds and trees. So spot spraying, pretty common. I think we hear people do that every year. 85% do spot spray, and of those 85%, 97% of them do it every single year. Mechanically remove, a little less, 70% people mechanically remove trees. So cutting cedar trees or cutting and spraying locust trees or hedge trees. 68% of those respondents do it every year. So again, a lot of money's being spent, a lot of time's being spent out in pastures, spot spraying thistles and other weeds and cutting them down. A little less frequently, prescribed burn, 40% of respondents utilize that. About 3.5 years was the average on that. So 3 to 4 years is when they get that done. And then aerial spraying, a lot less people do that at 28%. And the average time between aerial sprays is 4 years. One person said they have done aerial spraying in the past, but they were not really happy with it. Just thought I would add that note in there on the aerial spraying. So again, we see pretty even split on who's controlling what. So tenant, landowner, or both. It's pretty much an even 1/3 split on each of those on who controls what. I think there's a couple that indicated that the tenant takes care of the weeds, so spot spraying, and the landowner cuts down the trees. So, I mean, it's hard telling what they mean by both, who's actually doing the bulk of the work. I'm sure one or the other, but that is one scenario where tenant does the weeds and the landowner does trees. So with that, I will take any questions or comments. You can unmute. I did see something popped into the chat. Is the age of the respondents reflective somewhat of free time to answer the survey? That's possible. It's hard to say, to be honest with you, on why the age of the respondents is the way it is. However, I mean, fact of the matter is we do have an aging population that is actually farming. So yes, maybe there is some merit to that. But I think majority or a lot of it has to do with the fact that our farmers are getting older and there's fewer youngsters coming back to take it over. Any other questions? Again, you can type those in the chat or you can just unmute and holler them out at me. And if there are no questions, we can move on to Rebecca's. I will give Rebecca some time to share her screen.
Okay. Pat. Okay.
That looks
Should be
good there.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, I'm Rebecca Zach. I'm the crop production agent. And so this year actually had pretty good response. We had 72 respond to the cropland portion. And so just kind of a reminder that, you know, it doesn't reveal land size, anything like that, technology use, commodity prices, any other factors like that. Don't really look into that, kind of more basic. So starting off, we have just written versus oral contracts. So something to note is that we have gotten a lot more written this year. Last year it was a lot more towards oral. So it's good that everyone's moving more towards written. Something interesting you might note is on oral, we only had 4 that were cash rent. And then on the written ones, there were 8 that were on shares. So might be something to it, just kind of interesting to note. Usually orals are more kind of trusting that nothing's going to go wrong, but you know, kind of like what Brett said, want to really go more towards that written just in case. And then the relationship to the tenant, again, a lot more unrelated. And then just family members. Okay, and then where the landowner actually resides, kind of pretty split on this. Not really much to note, just now we get into the actual rental rates. Overall, the rental rates went up this year. So compared to like last year, Clay's average was 57 and jumped to an average of 80. Cloud was 73 last year, jumped up to 97. Republic was 75, now $10 more at 85. Washington was 80 last year, so not too much of a jump, but just kind of an overall average of all the counties last year was 73. So again, still jumping up about $10 there. Had a lot more higher max than last year. Cloud was one to note, but again, with the respondents, we only had 2 there. Next, we have some irrigated. So we did get a lot more responses on this throughout the whole district. A lot of different ways that people can go about it. Had 3 that responded that they did a 60-40 split, and then 2 with a 50-50. And then dollars per acre, about $220. And that was up a lot more. Last year, the average was about $190 for irrigated. All right, and so again, with that whole farm split, most popular, the 40-60, that was what it was last year. Kind of, I mean, terms you can, all the other stuff you can split it however you want, but the big one was 60-40. That's kind of the average. And so some of the other things that you can split, again, based on that 60-40 split, all of them said that they split their fertilizer that way. Again, a lot more on the herbicide split it that way too. Now the fungicide and insecticide, since you might not do it every year, kind of tapering off at that point. And then going to application costs. So if you have sprayer running over it or something, how do you want to split that up? Now the terrace and structure maintenance, that's an interesting one because sometimes if it's a big kind of remodel situation, that might fall more on the landowner versus the tenant. If it's something easy to fix, that's more likely to be the tenant. Something kind of note in your lease, seed really depends on situation, and then kind of a few lesser ones, irrigation, maintenance, seed tech fees, and then harvest, however you split that up. All right, and then we get into flex rent and crop share by crop. We get a lot less responses on both of these. So flex rent, we only had 3 responses, and really with a flex rent, you can go quite a few different ways with that. I mean, the first one, pretty straightforward, you know, yield by harvest, price by 22.5%, and that's how they figure out what the rent's going to be. Some of them do, you know, profit percentage based on crop type. So if prices go up, the landowner might get a boost in that rent for that year. But on the same note, if the prices drop, then the landowner could see a reduction. So depends how comfortable you feel with doing a flex rent. Might be something to look into if you're looking for a different way. And then popular crop share by crop, usually wheat gets a little lower split with 1/3 split. And then milo, corn, soybeans usually sticks to that 40-60 split. All right, and then duration of the lease. Again, a lot of people are in a 21+ year lease, but we see a lot more in that 2 to 5 and then 6 to 10. That's a big area coming up, and only 2 within first year. I mean, yeah, the average is 21 years. Now, renegotiating the rent or the rate on that lease. A lot of them do it each year. We did have 4 that said they never renegotiate that. You'll see on the next page that with the other terms, it's the same group of people that also said they never negotiate the other terms. But they all have oral contracts and they all live in the same county. So that's probably a good situation that they have really good communication and maybe willing to, you know, do a little bit more for the landowner or something. Just a unique situation, but again, usually each year renegotiate the other terms in the agreement. Now we're going to move on to grazing cropland. So we asked if they did crop residue or cover crop. We had 24 people say that they did. 16 did not graze their land. We also asked about payment methods, stocking rate, grazing days, and then many of the leases have grazing rights included and no extra charge. So it came down to 13 respondents did the dollar per acre with 3 animals an acre, and then 94 grazing days, which kind of talked to Brett a little, might be a little bit longer than normal, but an average of $11 an acre. And then on the dollar per head per day, average of 2 animals per acre, and then 60 grazing days with an average of 28 cents. And it was pretty split between if it was dry cows or pairs. So now we get into some custom work. 20 people said that they had custom work performed, and then 17 had done it on another farm. So for Anhydrous,
you got to fold up paper towels and sop it up with your heel.
Sorry, Anhydrous was about $15 an acre. Baling large round was about $14.80, $14.80 a bale. Combining, about $30. So also on harvesting, usually, sometimes if it's over a certain amount of bushels per acre, they'll start adding towards that. A couple different ones I got was for corn harvest. If it was over 75 bushels an acre, it was a plus 20 cents over that. And then for milo, over 50 bushels an acre, it was 18 cents over. So back to drilling, about $15.77 an acre. Grain hauling, 18 cents a bushel mile. I didn't put that in right. Then planting, $19.15 an acre. Swathing, usually $12 an acre. I got one that did it $100 an hour, and then one that did a combo swathing baling for waterways for $27.50 per bale. So kind of a different approach, especially with waterways. Maybe. And then spraying about $7.30 an acre, and then tillage $17, and then got dozer work in there for $175 an hour, and had one that someone did weed wiping at $65 an hour. Thought that might be an issue for next year, but did ask about dicambimine. So a lot of people were actually pretty not worried about dicamba this year. Definitely thought it was going to be there for next year anyway. Of course, we found out it will be, so that's always good. And then I guess if you guys have any questions.
I'll let everyone mull over or think about any questions they may have. Ann had asked the question right before you started on aerial spraying for the fall. She asked, is fall aerial spraying still recommended? I guess it kind of depends on what your goals are with your pasture. I mean, we got to think about the reasons why we would aerial spray. Is the terrain hard to get to, hard to spot spray, or is there just a large area we can't get to because, and maybe there's some weeds that are out of control that we want to target, and then also are the weeds that we're spraying susceptible in the fall? So those are just some things we got to think about, and obviously the cost per acre to actually spray, is it worth it? So I mean, there's several factors. Sometimes yes, it can be reasonable to aerial spray in the fall. It just, again, it can depend on several factors, whether it's actually recommended. So good question, Ann. Are there any other questions for myself or Rebecca before we turn it over to Trenton? So Barb asked, are we going to talk about selling prices per acre for upland, irrigated, and pasture? We will not be talking about that. However, there are some sources out there for land values. The Kansas Land Values book comes out every year. Maybe Trenton knows a little more about that. I'm trying to think who does that. I think it's Trenton. Do you guys put that together, or
I think Michael put that together.
Michael Taylor put that together?
I think that's who worked on it.
Okay. Well, and unfortunately, Michael Taylor has left us this year. I think she just moved down to Auburn. Probably within the last couple of weeks. I think she must have wanted to see some warmer weather, but she took a position with her alma mater there in Auburn. So I don't know. There was one last year, Barbara. and I can send that to you if you're interested in the Kansas Land Value book. It kind of breaks it down by region in the state and pasture and irrigated and non-irrigated, and how many tractors. It's pretty good. It's a good resource for you if you're looking at selling or buying land. Anybody else got any other questions before we turn it over to Trenton? I'm seeing none. Again, if you think of some as Trenton's talking, just type them in the chat, and we can cover those at the end. Or if you just want to wait till the end and unmute and ask, then that's fine as well. But in the meantime, I'll let Trenton share his screen and get into his content.
Yay. Happy to be here tonight, virtually, of course. I'm Trenton Hargrave with Farm Management in North Central Association in Abilene. I cover in the farmers I work with, as far as the River Valley District, I work in Washington and Clay County. Will Feldkamp would cover the western half of our association, so he covers Republic and Cloud County. Dave Rempe also covers Clay County. Along with the three of us, we also have Bob Coleman and Jenna Brinkman in our office. A little bit about Kansas Farm Management. If you don't know, we do farm analysis for farmers that we work with. Kind of meet with them 4 times a year, twice at their place in the spring, once in the spring, once in the fall, kind of to go over their financials and their entire farm financial picture, give them as much advice as we can on what they need to be doing, but maybe not necessarily in the now, but planning for the future as well. Then in the December, we do a tax estimate and then kind of collect information from them in January. With the analysis, we also prepare income tax preparation for them, for our members as well. Our association covers from Marshall down to Marion, over to Smith and Russell counties. So River Valley District is kind of in the upper middle of our association. Kind of some of the stuff we put together is accrual net farm income. There's 6 associations across the state, and last year for 2019, the state average net farm income was $110,000. As you can see,
Hey, Trenton, was you just going to share your slides? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. That's okay. I was waiting for it, and it never came, so I figured I'd interrupt you. So.
Yeah.
There we go. Now we can see it. Thank you.
Okay. So this is the counties we cover. Said our statewide average net farm income was $110,000. North Central was very close to that average. Most of the associations were pretty close to that, except for South Central and Southwest. Looking at that net farm income, it's derived from value of farm production, which is basically your gross income, total farm expense. We also kind of look at livestock income and gross crop value, and then expenses per $100 of farm production, which is basically you bring in $100, how much of it's going out the door to somebody else. Comparing the counties that we have information for in the River Valley District, Clay County last year had a net farm income of just under $75,000. And Washington County was just a little over our association average at 111,000. We don't have enough farms in Cloud and Republic County to have their information publicized. We have some farms in those counties, just not enough to want to publish that data. Obviously, 2019 is a little old information, but it's hard to put together 2020 information when most farmers haven't put together their 2020, finished their 2020 books yet. So it's kind of looking forward. What do you care too much about 2019? Well, we can kind of make some observations based on meetings with producers. Like I said, we meet on the farm twice a year and just got done about a month ago doing tax estimates. Kind of some observations from meeting with those guys. Government payments were considerably higher in 2020 than 2019. Last year in 2019, our high profit farms had an average of 138,000 in government payments. And this year, some of the farms that I would say were probably in that category were in the 200,000 plus, and some over $500,000 in government payments. And also with the fall run up in prices, crop prices are much higher, but yields are a little more sporadic for 2020. Corn yields mostly were higher. Had soybean yields, some below average, some right at average, which for a lot of our guys was pretty disappointing because they were looking at good soybean yields and then dropped off with no rain in August. So I would say overall, we're kind of expecting a higher net farm income for 2020, but there's a lot of pessimism because that's largely due to government payments. So that's kind of what to keep in mind for 2021, kind of what government payments are going to look like for 2021. I'm expecting them to be lower. I also wasn't expecting a CFAP round 3. But overall, which would be about $20 per crop acre, and then some livestock. I haven't heard exactly what they're using. I've seen the number that they're using per head, but I haven't figured out how they're calculating how many head you have yet. And then the other thing is to help you with 2021, ignore what happened to prices in 2020. Just like everything else in 2020, the way prices ran up at the last third of the year was just unreal. Historically not normal. So if you're looking at creating a marketing plan or sticking to your previous marketing plan, ignore what happened in 2020. I know it's hard, especially for guys that were aggressive marketing, have been aggressive marketing, and then got burnt pretty early on prices. But don't let the current run up cloud your judgment. And that includes with pricing next year. Don't look at the basis that they're offering, the basis they're offering next fall and say, well, it's not near what as good as what it is now. Look at it from a historical standpoint, and it looks pretty good historically. Not telling you to go out and do basis contracts on all your crops, but kind of keep an eye on it and don't let it. I mean, you always want to, everybody always looks at current prices, but need to be looking at those new crop basis to see what, don't let those deteriorate any more than they have. We have some, looking like 2019 was a decent net farm income. Looks like 2020 is going to be a higher net farm income. So does that mean it's time to spend money on the farm? Most economists like to say maybe. So spending money, yes, but no, don't spend money just to spend money. Got some questions to ask you before you go out and just spend money. Do you think prices will stay where they're at? Do you think the government will keep paying you $200,000 plus a year in program payments? Or coming up with new programs that pay the kind of money that was paid out in 2020? And what is your feelings on income taxes, how they will change in the next few years, because that does affect how you should maybe look at your tax bill in the next year or two, is what you think it will be looking like in 3 to 4 years down the road. If you answered no to any of these questions, you need to be thinking not so much do you need to be spending money, but more what should you be doing to put your farm in a better financial position. Because at the end, that's what we're more about. We're not necessarily about dragging your tax bill as low as possible. We're looking at getting your income at a level that is best for your farm. So kind of what do you do when you have high profit years? You can buy equipment, but not if that's the only reason you're doing it is because you made money and don't want to pay taxes. Buying equipment isn't the right idea. Buying inputs, kind of prepaying seed, fertilizer, chemical, things you know you're going to have every year, that it's pretty common to pay those as kind of a hedge for a poor year. And something that I never thought about doing is actually paying more taxes, but we actually did have brought it up with some of my members, and some of them actually brought it up on what will the future hold for their taxes. Kind of if you feel that the incoming administration is going to be raising taxes, adjusting tax laws. Kind of the big things that affect your tax bill would be the tax rates, which a few years ago they dropped from 15 to 12% for the most common bracket. And plus there was implemented, it's called a QBI deduction, which is 20% of your net farm income or any net business income gets taken off your total income or your taxable income. So that's something that is favorable for any business owner to decrease their income tax bill. Those are also two things that most people are seeing as possibly going away, going back up to the 15% and doing away with that deduction. So those are things that would, in the future, increase your tax bill without really increasing your income. Another reason to go ahead and pay the tax bill is if, you've made this money, is it time to pay down some debt? Or do you need to be putting some money away because you got some land that either you're going to be buying soon, or got a landlord that's getting up there in age and think you're going to have to buy them. The only way to pay down term debt and buy land is by paying tax on that money first. With your equipment debt, you have the depreciation to kind of help pay that, but if you're going to buy land or pay down land, you kind of have to pay the taxes first, which is hard to do, but it's the best way to build equity in a farm. Getting into that debt, where should your debt load be? And that there's some general ideas, but it really depends upon the type of operation you run. As far as there's some standards out there that fit the row crop or any crop and cow-calf producers. If you're more into cattle feeding, you kind of have to look at those, but not look at them too closely, because our backgrounders typically have to carry a much higher debt load just because they're in a high capital environment. Also, it's kind of what is your farm experience, which is a nice way to saying how old are you. Older farmers should have better financials than the younger farmers. They've had longer to pay off some debt, plus have some of their assets increase in value, versus the younger farmers are still paying off that first piece of ground. There's no way around it. I mean, a lot of my younger guys I work with, they're just going to have ugly numbers and kind of they're going to be on the bottom end of the financials for the first 10 to 20 years that they're operating. It's a matter of, are they making improvements on their financial numbers? There are some general benchmarks, current ratio over 2, which basically have $2 of current assets for every $1 of current debt. And then debt to asset ratio under 0.4. So basically of all the assets you own 60%, the bank owns 40%. It's kind of the general rule. So like I said, it's more on the younger ones, especially what they're going to be high in debt. So what should their farm profitability be to handle that debt? Have a net farm income ratio over 0.2. Basically, 20% of the gross income that you bring in should be staying as profit. Recent years, kind of seeing that needing to be more 25%. Return of assets of return on assets of over 5% with a return on equity of over 8%. So return on assets is all the assets. Return on equity is the part that you own. Not interest expense at ratio of under 0.07 or 7% of your expense being an interest. Depreciation expense ratio of under 0.08 but over 0.04, so between 8% and 4%. Most of them we just have one number to look at. At depreciation, we have kind of a in between because we don't want your depreciation getting too low. That's when we see either you're going to have everything needing replaced at once, or more than likely you're having all your equipment is wore out and is constantly breaking down, causing you to have delays, which is making you inefficient and less profitable. So there are times when it is good to buy that equipment to keep you efficient. Often we look at combining interest and depreciation and keeping that number under 0.15. The reason for that is to kind of, like I said, the younger ones that are going to be higher debt load, or maybe not even younger ones, but any farmer that's higher debt load, they need to be looking at their depreciation being lower because their interest expense is going to be higher. But also on the other end of the spectrum, we have our producers that are well off, don't have little to no debt, so their interest expense ratio is rather low or zero, but the depreciation is really high. Most of that's because they have the cash and it's either a tax planning or they have the cash that they don't want to have to deal with breakdowns. They want to have good equipment. But it's a case of, like I said, they have the cash. It's okay for them to do that, just kind of not get too carried away. Brett mentioned kind of the looking for that land sale information. That's probably on agmanager.info. That's kind of the Ag Econ department's website. It has crop budgets, livestock budgets, all of our all of our farm management guides and reports from the last several years. And just a lot of good information out there for any producer that's has questions. Most of our members, we tell them, if you're in a hurry about finding something, go to Ag Manager, because that's probably where we're going to go to find the answer for you. That's all I have. If anybody has any questions.
Very good. I put I know we were asked about farmland values and selling prices. In the chat, you'll see the agmanager.info address there. That'll take you to the ag land values and trends page. It's got the 2019 agricultural values and trends that Michael Taylor and Robin Reed have put together from last April. Again, I don't know if they'll be updating that this year since Michael's gone. I highly doubt that. K-State's on a hiring freeze, so I don't think there's anyone to fill that position. So
I would be surprised unless they have somebody like Robin help with that. But I would have her plate full getting that done.
I would agree with you, Trenton. I had a question for you. I know I've heard the number batted around. You talked about government payments of what is it, 40%? I've heard. I don't know if that's nationally. That's the number I keep hearing of net farm income is is 40% of net farm income is from government payments. Is that been pretty true for the North Central Kansas region or Kansas in general?
Let me grab my book from last year, and I think we have that in here.
Okay. And I know it's to be determined, like you said, because 2020 is still yet to be finished out because obviously the taxes and whatnot. But I didn't know if you had any insight on that.
Last year, government payments was 73% of net farm income.
Wow. Okay. Higher than I realized.
Then, so back in basically 2009 through 2014, it was ranging from 11 to 18%. 2015, it jumped up to 180%. Then it's been 71, 83, 68, 73.
Yeah. Okay.
And 2/3, 3/4 of our net farm income has been from government payments in the last 5 years.
Okay. So really high.
Yeah.
Well, are there any questions for Trenton on his content, on his program, or for Rebecca or myself? Barbara asked, is the number of bankruptcies and sellouts increasing? And to answer that question, the best I can do is give you information that Michael gave us from last year. So again, this will be a little dated. Give me a couple seconds and I'll get it pulled up. Dated by a year, that is.
And I think it's higher, not as high as it was in the 80s.
Yeah. Bottom line is, yeah, it's higher, but not that high.
Like it was in the 80s.
Here, I'll share my screen. I found it. So if you look at the screen there, you can see 87. We had 265 Chapter 12 bankruptcies. 14 and 15, we had single digits, and it had been creeping up to 21, 25, and 35 in 2018. And I think one point that Michael had always made was Chapter 12 bankruptcies are a lagging indicator of a farm profitability. So as we might see them climbing, even if farm profitability goes up, because they're still kind of trying to recover from the bad that was happening in 2000 and whatever the years were, 14, 15, 16. So they're still recovering from that and may not. So we might see 19 and 20 as higher than they were in 18, but then they might taper off. I don't know what it is lagging. I don't know how many years that is. Maybe you know the answer to that, Trenton.
I'm not for sure. Okay. One thing on the sellouts part, I think I see more of the 60 to 70-year-old farmers are going to retire versus farm until they die.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of a generational gap or group of guys that have a life outside the farm. They've been preached to for years to have something besides the farm be their life, and they want to actually have a retirement, not a.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else anyone wants to type in the chat, or just feel free to unmute and ask any questions you'd like. We'll try to answer them as best we can, or if there are none, we won't take up any more of your time. We'll give everyone a few minutes to think about it. Again, we got the summary mostly wrapped up. There are a few things. I had some technical difficulties today with my computer trying to finish it. But we will email the summary to you tomorrow. And there was a question in the chat. I'll let you look at that, Trenton, and answer that. But we will email that to you tomorrow. If you do want a hard copy, just respond to that email with your address, and I will send you a hard copy to your physical address.
Jeff, kind of any time of the year is good. Obviously, probably not in February, March, because we're too busy to meet with new clients. But if you want to get a hold of Brett, he has my contact information.
Yeah, I got your contact information, Trenton, and I can send that to you, Jeff, if you are interested in it and getting a hold of Trenton. I will certainly send that over to you. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing anything else pop in the chat. Oh, here we go. Okay, I will do that. Any upcoming meetings to announce? Good question, Fred. I will get to that in a second. I got a question regarding hunting leases. So do you get requests for information regarding leasing farm ground for hunting? Yes, we do. It's very sporadic, and we usually, in the past, we've asked about hunting leases on our lease survey. I don't know if maybe you guys have gotten it in the past. I think 2 years ago we removed that question because it was never answered, and I don't know if they're private about it, that's one they didn't want to share, or maybe we just weren't hitting the right people. But it's variable, highly variable, depending on if you're doing a private lease or if you're just doing something through Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. You can get paid quite a bit from some rich millionaire to hunt some pretty good river bottom ground for deer. So, it could be really high and it could be really low. And if you just got some weak ground that's, not going to hold any wildlife, there's probably not much there in terms of hunting ground. So there is some variability. Obviously we see it with our cropland and our pasture land, but we just don't get enough data to give anyone a good answer. We would get 1 or 2 responses that would give us a dollar amount per acre that they get paid each year, and that would be it. So no, we don't really have much information. My best recommendation would maybe just be call Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks and see kind of what their rate is for public hunting. Just Kansas walk in, that'll give you a ballpark. And then also, unfortunately, the next best thing is probably trying to find some land manager, which I know they'll probably try to rope you into the lowest bottom price. But it's one thing that we just never really can get good information on is hunting ground, leasing it for hunting. Is there anything, you got anything to add, Rebecca or Trenton, on that? Yeah.
It's just hard, depends on what the ground looks like, really.
Yeah. Yep. Some of the best hunting ground is the worst farming ground. So it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell sometimes. Fred asked about any upcoming meetings. Yes, we do. Rebecca, I'll let you cover yours. I know you got some that are already scheduled.
Yeah. So I have one coming up, and it is February 9th from 12:30 to 5:30 at Belleville. And it's going to be a corn marketing class with Dan O'Brien and Mark Nelson. And it's going to be kind of a all afternoon, but it's going to be hands-on, kind of talking about how the markets are fluctuating in different places you can market your corn. Should be pretty interesting. We are partnering with Post Rock, so Sandra Wick will be a part of it. But yeah, and you kind of sign up the same way you signed up for this. That's my big one coming up, Brett.
Okay. And for the livestock side of things, I don't have anything scheduled at this moment. I do have a meeting with several agents and on Thursday, We've been talking about getting some things on the books. To get that information, I recommend you can follow us on Facebook if you have that. Trying to think, we try to get that information on our website and our newsletter, and I send out news releases. If you get some of the local papers, we put them in there. And then also just check our event calendar on our website, rivervalley.ksu.edu. I will put that in the chat.
Yeah, and you can also sign up for our email newsletters. That's a good way to see what's upcoming anyway.
Yep. Check out our rivervalley.ksu.edu website. We got a lot of information on there. You can click on the livestock page or the crops page and look there. We have an events calendar. Just kind of skim through there. Also, the Ag Manager website is good for statewide stuff and anything that has to do with money and farming. I got another question here, Trenton, that might be relative, you might be better to answer, and I think you hit on a little bit. Are you hearing that Biden administration will increase inheritance taxes significantly? CPA had said that her accounting meetings are discussing this, and capital gains increasing. I know you hit on that a little bit. I know that's a lot of people are thinking.
I would say for most farmers, it won't be an issue just for I think they're probably going to look at lowering it back down to where it was pre-Trump, which would still cover most of the farms. You get into farms that have thousands of acres, then they're going to be looking at maybe having to do some use valuations like were done previously. But I haven't heard of any drastic changes that would affect people that have that $2 to $6 million estates, as long as it's a couple. You get into that because right now it's over 11 million that can be exempt from any inheritance tax. I think that probably it was around 4 or 5 million before that, and I could see it going back down to that. Like I said, that would cover most farmers, but there was some of the larger farms that they were having to do use valuations to get that down sometimes, which basically your kids don't get a full stepped up basis. They get it stepped up at the use value, but as long as they're still farming, that shouldn't be an issue for them because they're not looking at selling the ground.
Alrighty. Chat slowing down. Again, if you got anything you want to ask us, feel free to throw in the chat or unmute. Don't be afraid. There's not that many of us on here, so. All right. Well, nothing's coming in my chat, so I guess we'll go ahead and jump off here. I appreciate everyone for joining us. Again, we will email you the email that you provided to get onto this Zoom. We will email you the PDF of our survey summary paper, so it'll have most, if not all, of the information about the land leases and pasture and cropland leases, and then also our labor portion. And then some other resources that we'll have on there with helping out with your leases. So look for that in your inbox tomorrow. And again, if you want a hard copy, put your physical address and a reply to that email, and we'll mail it to you. And with that, I will let you go. We appreciate you guys for being on tonight, and have a good rest of your evening and a happy 2021, excuse me.